a new person, a small, medium enterprise, first time into this industry perspective, what that looks like. And I guess that's why I'm in this seat today.
Thank you, Andrea. Kris.
Hi, sorry. I do public address announcing at sporting events, so my kind of comes out a little bit. So hi, everyone. My name is Kris Ruiter. I am the regional manager with Procurement Assistance Canada. So I'm actually from the federal government when we start talking about defense and defense.
And he's here to help.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for having me here today, for sure. So essentially, as much as it always sounds funny that there's this federal government team that's actually designed to help, we are actually designed to help. Procurement is a big beast of a thing. We're buying anywhere. The numbers always kind of fluctuate, but it's, let's say $50 billion a year of stuff, goods, services, construction, and certainly in the defense industry. But it's the government, so it's got a lot of rules and it's got a lot of layers, and it's not the easiest thing to navigate. So while we are internal to Public Services and Procurement Canada, my team, Procurement Assistance Canada, really is on the supplier side of things. We spend all of our days doing webinars and seminars and panel discussions and trade shows. We've got a big one tomorrow with the City of Calgary. And we really pride ourselves on one-on-ones. So we do lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of one-on-ones with our team. Last year we did close to 900 events, half of those being one-on-ones with businesses where we sit down, understand where you're at, what stage you are, what industry you're in, and then help you cut through all the noise that is government and government procurement to try and save you some time as to what to look at and what not to look at. You do this, look over here. You do that, never look at that again, because it won't apply to you, and to sort of cut through that information. So I've been very fortunate to have some great conversations over the years with Jeff on procurement and where it's going and what it's doing and what it is. I've had the pleasure of working with Andrea as well over the last couple of years with Savvy Knowledge and what they're doing, and Emmy, meeting you today. But of course, General Dynamics, a big player in the defense industry, and we'll get into stuff probably around industrial technology benefits and various areas where you can try and get a foot in the door and participate with the federal government. So again, thanks for having me here, and look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So I'm going to provide some context here. The federal government's new budget just came out yesterday. None of us have read through all 400 pages of it by this morning, I assure you, so we don't know all the details of it, but it's very clear that there is a huge amount of new spend in defense, as was expected, which also means there's a huge decline in other areas of focus for the federal government, and necessary to try and create as balanced a budget as they can, even with the massive deficit that's associated with it. The challenge with that, though, is that it creates this expectation of, wow, there's a lot of money going into this, we should all be part of it. And the reality is that it's not something you can do overnight. You can't just switch from being a non-defense company into a defense company in a very short order, because there's a huge amount of things that are necessary before you are ready to be a defense company. And part of what we want to have in this panel discussion is setting expectations, setting realistic expectations of what it takes to go from where you are to where you might want to be if you want to get into defense, including understanding the nature of defense and being ready not only from a technical perspective, but also from a mental perspective to deal with what it means to be in a defense-related industry. So part of that is expectations, part of that is reliance, part of that is relationships that you need to have. To be effective, relationships are a massive requirement in the defense sector. And part of the reason why we're being so successful right now is because we have this relationship with General Dynamics, Mission Systems Group, with Emmy and his team. And they, because they are established, they've been around for decades in this industry, can open doors for us as a small business that would take a lot longer if we'd ever get through them without their support. So that kind of a partnership doesn't happen overnight. We started talking with General Dynamics probably about a decade ago. And we got our first real activity with them probably about a year ago. So it took us almost 9 years to go from a first meeting, a first conversation, to an actual work relationship with them to move forward past that point. So this is an investment, is really what I'm getting to. When you're thinking about the defense industry, it's not an overnight thing. You have to really be serious that this is something you want to do and be willing to take the time to make the investment to get to a point where you're ready to actually participate. So I'm going to switch right now to Emmy. From the perspective of one of these existing established companies, what does it take to be a small business working with them, and what do they look for? Because we're going to get into something which maybe I'll actually do it before we jump into that. There's something called ITBs, or Industrial Technological Benefits. If you get involved in this industry at all, you'll run into this conversation, this terminology. Essentially, this is an incentive structure the federal government has imposed upon large businesses who operate in this, what we call the defense primes or prime contractors, that a portion of the business that they receive from the government has to be provided to small businesses as a result of that. Comes out in two primary ways. One of them is in a large contract, there's a subcontract requirement. I think it's about 15% of the contract value has to go to small businesses as subcontracted. But there's also an obligation side of it, which is if money is spent outside of Canada, so Canadian taxpayer money spent outside of Canada, there's a re-spend of value equivalence inside of Canada that has to happen. And there's multipliers associated with how that money is spent. And the highest level of multipliers is an R&D project where you're actually working over a 5-year duration with a large defense company to do something that is valuable to both the large defense company and the small business. And that gets you up to a 9 times or maybe a 10 times multiplier. So if they had a $20 million obligation, they only need to spend $2 million to cover that obligation. But there's other levels below that that are different engagements, including just buying stuff from a small business or investing into a research and development group like a university. So these things exist, but what you'll find, and this is the big thing you have to realize, is that companies don't make decisions. General Dynamics, as an example, wouldn't make a decision around working with you because they have an ITB obligation. They'll make a decision working with you because it adds value to their organization. And the ITB value is kind of the cherry on top of an established relationship that goes beyond that. So never start off with, well, we can take your ITBs and we can use them. That's not going to get you very far. You need to figure out why they would want to work with you and what the value of doing so is before you ever get to that conversation around ITBs could apply in that case. So turn it over to Emmy around that perhaps, or do you want to actually jump in, Andrea?
Just real quick here. So for me, ITBs made my head spin. I'm a fairly intelligent human being, but the whole idea and what ITBs break down to and all the things. How many of you in this room are familiar with SHRED? Okay, so imagine all of the moving parts in SHRED and where you can get multipliers, and depending on how you submit your value or your research based here, the play is somewhat similar to SHRED, I find, and that helped me to understand there's a lot of moving parts. It's not very clear, but having somebody who can help you navigate through, like an accountant or a SHRED expert, is also valuable.
Yeah, so maybe I'll build on that, Andrea, because ITBs is a significant commitment for our company in particular. We have individuals whose full-time job is to manage ITBs and manage SHRED. And even for those individuals whose career is based on gaining experience there, it's a lot of work. And so what Jeff brought up around our commitment to generate as many ITBs as possible, on the surface, it sounds very logical, maybe straightforward, but as a big defense prime, what we often struggle with is, amongst, all the representatives here, you might find that 10 people stand up and said they have world-class technologies, and, that would bring a great smile to my face, and it fits our portfolio. We can do a lot of things with it, but it's really the challenges that come after that. Are you a company that's been registered for the Controlled Goods Program, right? So in the defense industry, for us to take in your products, and we are a business, so we try to sell those products, whether it's through PSPC, whom you represent.
And Procurement Services.
Yeah,
PSPC.
You're going to be my acronym translator, right? So it's really important that when you are engaging in the defense industry, the credentials that you need, the qualifications, I can't even understate this because it was something very new to me, because I worked in academia, I I transferred to industry, and I thought I could just do collaborations with academia very seamlessly, and that was absolutely far from the case. And so when Jeff says, he met and engaged with GD 10 years ago, and it's only now that we have a relationship, I think that is a good story for everyone here, because when Jeff brought this up is when I first started at GD, and I only knew VizworX and their capabilities through a website. 10 years later, we're actually doing work. And when now we want to do future work with Jeff, it's very straightforward because his company passes all the credentials. They are in our system to say, Jeff is a trusted company to deal with. And for him to get to that state with our commercial experts, our legal experts, our procurement experts, it takes a very long time. It takes a very long time. So any type of engagement that you've had in non-defense industry, and you're looking to engage with a new company that you have no relationship with, you would have to tag on, a minimum of 6 months. If you have deadlines, if you have aspirations and targets for when you think things would come to fruition, you have to tag 6 months. And that is strictly from a logistical standpoint. That has nothing to do with the technology and the offering that you have, just pure logistics.
I guess I'll add a little bit of something to that. So, Emmy, as you're speaking about do you check off the boxes foundationally? So, like he was mentioning, so for me at Savvy Knowledge, we build end-to-end technology solutions that scale expert training and in-person coaching without scaling the headcount. So when you think about that, do I need a goods and service certification and all the things? Well, being curious and proactive and reaching out to and getting guidance and advice from those who understand the realm, now I'm in the middle of, so CMMC, I don't even know what that acronym means, but it's a cybersecurity certification required by the Department of Defense in the US. Canada is launching the CPCSE, again, a cybersecurity something, that is Canada's version of your requirement to sell into defense. So even though I'm selling and we have solutions that are about training and people and HR solutions and retention, this is going to be required for me regardless of what technology we offer. That is going to be something because, FCI, so that's Federal Contract Information. Yay.
Well done.
FCI. Because that information needs to be protected. That information in the wrong hands or leaked in the wrong areas. So because we deal with that type of information transfer, that we have data about users, people, trends, that needs to be secure before we even do any work. And that in itself is an interesting ticket of investment and time before we even get to the conversation of what can we do, what problem do we solve, and what does that potentially look like and where.
I really appreciate this conversation, especially around the industrial technology benefits, because while the industrial technology benefits program is a federal program, in the end, what it really is an opportunity for B2B business. It's business to business. It's an obligation on the defense primes as part of their contract to the government of Canada for what they're supplying, but the actual ITBs is B2B. So to hear Emmy and Andrea talk about it that way, and Jeff as well, just that it's that relationship. So it is another way in the door, without question, when it comes to defense contracting and what the federal government is doing, but it is that relationship. It's not the smaller business to the government in this case. There are other areas for that, but it is really what are the requirements needed by the prime in order to do that. When we flip that into, and it sounds a lot like what we talk about from the actual prime perspective and being the contract holder with the federal government, there's two main requirements. Like when you break it all down, I mean, it gets much more complicated than this, but when you break it all down, there's two fundamental requirements. Are you legally allowed to do business in Canada? Kind of important. And can you meet the requirement? And so it's very similar to what you're just talking about. Can you meet the requirements not only of what the federal government requires from a cybersecurity perspective or a controlled goods perspective or whatever else, but it's also what are the requirements of the prime. So that B2B relationship's on that, and then when you start dealing with us, it's on what the federal government requires. So there's a couple of layers to that in order to be able to participate either on the B2B side or the B2G side, business to business or business to government.
And added into that, just to understand it, is that not all organizations are actually able to work in the defense industry. You may have personnel in there that are not Canadian citizens who cannot work on defense projects, as an example. You may have investors even in the organization that are not able to be involved in projects that have a defense nature to them. So the structure of your organization can also be a limiting factor in terms of whether you're actually able to participate, aside from all the other things we talked about in terms of the business relationships that Kris and Emmy have mentioned. So, these are considerations we have to think about. And sometimes if you think, well, it is the opportunity, it's where we want to go, you may have to clean up your cap table. You may have to clean up your organization in order to be able to participate, because you may not actually have the right structure that allows you to do so otherwise.
And just one last point on this. It's one of those classic sort of, for more information, this is where my team comes in, right? You reach out to us, we'll have that conversation. But one of the nice things about the Industrial Technology Benefits Program, it is very public. So you can literally Google Industrial Technology Benefits. You're going to get to a dedicated website for that information. It actually lists all the prime contractors and all their obligations with contacts of who to reach out to within those organizations. So it's nice, it's very public, so you can see much more about what it's about, how the value propositions work inside the program, and then as you have more questions, then you call me.
Yeah, and along those lines, and Emmy mentioned this, there are people within these organizations who are dedicated to supporting ITBs or industrial technological benefits. That's their job. And they're often a first point of contact for a small business to talk to them, because their job is to figure out how to manage the ITB obligations of the organization, and that comes through working with small businesses. However, they don't hold the dollars. They don't actually hold the budget to actually do anything about that. They need to connect you with divisions within the organization who may have an interest in what you're doing and may be aligned with what they're doing. And so, again, they're at a starting point, and they're the cherry on the top if it works out, but they're not the decision point for you being able to work with this large business.
Great. So it's a great point. Even in Jeff's case, how I met and was engaged with Jeff is through somebody that owned our ITB portfolio. But ultimately, I have a budget which is for a global portfolio, and ultimately, Jeff is probably one of the best in his domain, but without this ITB program, we could arguably go anywhere in the world. So it does motivate us to find Canadian talent and Canadian capabilities. And, part of this relationship is twofold. So number one, as Kris was alluding to, on the government website, they do a really fantastic job of not just laying out what the foundation for ITBs are, but they also list, I think every year, the key capabilities that Canada is looking for. So they're going to have a list of capabilities that the government's looking for. We often look at that list, and if you are aspiring to get into the defense industry, it's probably a great idea to say, well, there's 16 things here that Canada is actively funding or actively interested in the next 5 to 10 years. If you are investing a lot of time and money in something that doesn't fulfill that list, you should question it, because when we are looking to win more business from Kris, we're also ensuring that we're aligned to their roadmap, right? We're aligned to things that Canada needs. And to take that broader, because of the global portfolio we have, we are very proud to take technology from Canada, made in Canada, and export it to different markets, right? So it's not just a singular customer that we have, even though Canada is our biggest customer. We are in Europe, we're in the US, we're in different markets. And so you also have to consider, it's not just, do I pass the regulations within Canada? The technology that you're producing, is it dual use? Can it be exported? How big are your dreams, right? These are all the things you have to consider in terms of certification and regulations. And those are things that still, I believe, within your organization, you could still help with some of the export regulations and how to manage things within Canada. Because ultimately, if you export anything, it still needs to be cleared by the government of Canada.
Yeah, we're a room full of innovators, right? We're talking about innovation, and one of the reasons of so much focus on this industrial technology benefits program is it's an innovation way through in the door. Andrea mentioned in her opening around the Innovation Solutions Canada platform and that program. And then there's another program which is called Department of National Defence Ideas Program. These are all different innovation programs, and they exist. They exist because, well, fundamentally, to be honest, from a pure procurement standpoint, we don't procure innovation well. We don't. I mean, we don't. It's a reality.
At all.
No, and I'm okay saying that. We don't, and because one of the foundational components to procurement is that when we go out to procure something, we have to define the requirement. Well, if it's a new innovation, a new way of doing something, we don't even know it exists maybe. So how do you define that? Or if it's a new way of doing something, it's a ridiculous kind of story, but I met a couple of companies a couple of years ago that had road de-icer technology. Now, I grew up near Montreal. That's salt, right? Like, it's salt. And they said, no, we don't, no, it's not salt. No, we got something else. I said, okay, well, that's great. So we looked up opportunities. Parks Canada was buying, quote unquote, road de-icer. But the requirement definition, because we have to define the requirement when we go to procure, the first line said, must be 95% sodium chloride. It had to be salt. So these guys couldn't even participate. So part of that conversation with them is that they actually needed to talk to Parks Canada. They needed to talk to Parks Canada to say, hey, look, you need to open up this procurement definition so that we can participate because we can meet other goals that you may have. So in the innovation space, the conversation with procurement often happens a lot earlier. It's actually talking to the government before the procurement actually occurs. And where the other spaces that this happens is in the Innovation Solutions Canada program, which puts out challenges and testing stream. They've got a challenge stream and a testing stream in which innovations can be sought through that and turned into opportunities. And then there's a pathway to commercialization that happens through that program. Department of National Defence is a challenge-based program, same kind of thing. They have various pillars inside of that. And then there's the Industrial Technology Benefits Program because of the innovation side of things. So when you're bringing a new innovation into this, and you're trying to crack that nut of the federal government from a new innovation standpoint, whether we're talking about road de-icer or some very highly defense-related industry perspective, it's still going to come down to these different programs, these different relationships and conversations that have to be had. And so that's going to always be that first step, which is, as I think has been shared, is going to prolong the timeline. It's just going to simply take longer because you have to be able to have those conversations.
Just to make sure everybody understands what this challenge-based approach is that Kris is referring to, this is the government or the military putting out we don't know how to solve this, but we have this problem. And could you suggest a way to solve it? Can you throw in your ideas? And if you're successful, then you win the challenge and you're able to actually participate with the government in trying it out and testing it out.
But there are no guarantees.
There are absolutely no guarantees on that. The testing stream, which is the other piece of that in the Innovation Solutions Canada one, and we just won one of those, so we're lucky to be in that area, so yeah. That is actually, we've got something that's already being proven out, and working with General Dynamics has gotten us to the point where we can prove out this technology. We pitched this to the government saying, hey, we have a solution to this testing stream that you've requested, and they said, yes, that makes sense, we want to work with you. But there's a long process after that of us finding a test department in the government who wants to work with us and going through this whole process, which we're doing right now. to get to the point where they're actually going to do the testing, but then it can lead to what Kris was referring to, which is called the pathways to commercialization, pathways to commercialization, which is the procurement process that follows after the testing. So we've proven it, we've tested it, everybody liked it, great, okay, now they can actually procure it. So it's a kind of a shortcut way to get to a procurement defined around what we're actually doing. So it's a great program, but it is a challenge-based program where you're going to be competing against everybody across the country who is also pitching their own ideas.
So I'm an analogy queen. I love them. I think it helps things make sense. I'm also an athlete, been an athlete, all the things. So if I can share with you the experience I'm having right now, it's like I'm at an open tryout at a junior high basketball camp. I know I've got talent, I know I can do it, I know I can learn it, but I'm starting from the beginning. Not gonna get to the NBA yet, but that's the kind of mindset that I have right now, in that I need to understand the rules of the game. I need to understand the playing field that I'm in. I need to understand what athletic ability I'm bringing and what coaching and collaborative conversations are required. And I have to prove myself in junior high to then make it to the high school team. And then I have to prove it in my high school team to make it to my college team, and. But you're learning every step of the way, because at the end of the day, it's about de-risking a contract. It's about de-risking a relationship with organizations that, once you prove yourself, once you prove that you can deliver on what you promise, on what the end goal is, and that your results are realized, then that hard work going in bears fruit. So, that's my experience at this point, but that also takes commitment of, what am I willing to invest in time, in effort? I need to know that I trust that what I'm doing, I can deliver on too. There are paths that make that easier. There are paths that make that more financially viable, but there's a lot of proving ground that is required in this process.
I think this is really, really well spoken, because I'm only going to start about the culture of proving out technology within GD, let alone leveraging technology that's external. So if I come up with a new idea today, it would probably take a minimum of 5 years for it to be commercialized. And that's, gold star for me if I can do it in 5 years. So that means I've de-risked it to a level where people feel very comfortable with deploying it with real people that use it. And so there's big implications here. So I'll use another analogy. If I have technology that I've come up with and I've sold it to a school, and we have a lecture hall similar to this, and I'm going to showcase a new technology, a new projection, and it starts faltering, doesn't work. Everyone gets a little bit unhappy. Maybe our lectures ended early and you leave, okay? And I come back and we find some other way to do it. Now, take that scenario to some of the real conflicts that are happening around the world. If that same technology falters on the field, people die. When people die, there's families that are impacted, governments that are impacted. If it's General Dynamics that was responsible for that, our reputation, our relationship with the government is tarnished for a very long time. And you're lucky if you're able to repair it. So whenever we hire people, or whenever we do work with new companies, Jeff says they're SMEs, right? So small, medium enterprises. Is that right? Okay, good. In our business, we call SMEs subject matter experts, so that's why saying the acronyms is important. But I always emphasize that when you are going into the defense industry, you're not building toys. You're building real technology to help and defend and keep people safe. And when I go out to places like Europe, where they're at the forefront of these conflicts, you see the urgency in their faces that whatever technology that's brought forth, it has to be You have to minimize the risk so people don't lose their lives unnecessarily. You have to have proven technology, and the route to getting proven technology is very rigorous. Very, very, very rigorous. And I've only talking about technology that has been harnessed within GD. If I am now to build a relationship further with Jeff, and we get to the point where we're commercializing his products and selling it around the world, that path is one that we can't short circuit. It takes a long time. So just keep that in mind. As much homework as you can do before engaging primes, it goes a long way. Frankly, if we have a first interview of new technology and the individuals I'm speaking with don't understand the basics of being in the industry, it's unfortunately we're going to move to the next, right? Somebody that has aptly done their homework and understands what they're getting into, because the defense industry is very different than under other industries. The closest I can say to defense is probably health, right? Where there's arguably lives at stake, right?
Or public safety.
Or public safety, right? You know, a lot of places it's defense and public safety. So just keep that in mind. Do not take anything for granted when it comes to the rigor required for commercializing your technology in the defense space, because it is a very different thing. And I'll just add one more thing. There are many companies that we're engaging with now that have started building their companies in the, let's say public safety, actually, public safety in different industry. And now with, you know, a lot of funding for defense coming to the forefront, they're now transitioning from public safety to defense. And even that transition alone is very significant. All the requirements, standards, all these things that you have to adhere to, it's a major endeavor. It's very fruitful when it all works, and it's a big investment, but that goes back to having the conviction that this is something that you want to do, right? Because it's a long path, right? And I think you've communicated that well.
And just to give you a sense, if you need to get a security clearance, which at some point, if you're going to work in this industry, you will, that process alone, just to get a clearance, can take a year or longer. It took us 18 months. It doesn't cost a lot in terms of the actual amount of financial requirements. Lots of paperwork, lots of time involved in it for them to do all the security checks. And particularly if you originate from a country that's not Canada, some of those security checks can take even longer because they have to interact with the country of origin and find out information from that country of origin. So be aware, these timelines are not saying you can short circuit. If you need security clearances, you need security clearances, and there's no other way around it. You have to actually go through that process.
Yeah, the origin of parts in whatever kind of technology that you're building, especially if it's hardware, because of our supply chain and how globally connected everything is, you might inadvertently not know that something in the component or part that you're trying to sell us is sourced from a country on our blacklist, meaning that we will not engage or have any products from certain countries. And we have a list of countries that gets revised on an annual basis. And so, you know, through this conversation is probably, you know, it sounds maybe a little bit depressing because there's so much that needs to be done. But I could tell you, just Jeff is a great example, 10 years, kind of working through the defense industry, and now he has a really good partnership with General Dynamics. And I think that we were recently in an international trade show where we see new customers that are very interested in some of the things that Jeff can bring to the forefront for their defense platforms. And without kind of this platform of ITBs and engaging with SMEs, I don't know if it would have been Jeff that General Dynamics brought along, right? But we're very proud that it is. And it's because Jeff has a great relationship with not just myself, but many others at General Dynamics, right? And we take that to heart, because Jeff has done a really good job, very rigorous in everything he does. And that is almost a standard for anyone else that wants to come into the industry. Listen a lot to what the primes are saying. We certainly listen very diligently to PSBC and your team. We have an individual whose full job is to engage and ensure that the relationship is there, We keep saying relationship, and I think that's the same in all aspects of life, but even more so in the defense industry. As you're transitioning into something new, ensure that those relationships are very, very strong.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for that. It really is very, very important. And most of our conversation today has been about the big stuff, right? It's really been about industrial technology benefits and major defense primes, because we have General Dynamics here and we've got Savvy Knowledge here, who are on that both, looking at from the big prime and the smaller company. Jeff is you as well, and what that relationship there, and that's terrific. But I just want to be able to bring it back just for a second on from the procurement standpoint, because the perception of federal government procurement is that we buy billion-dollar things from billion-dollar companies. And rightly so, that is the perception, okay? Because we buy jet planes and we build Navy ships and we build billion-dollar bridges and all this kind of stuff. 100%, absolutely. The reality, though, is that 90% of our contracts are actually under $25,000 each. And most go to small and medium enterprise. Now, appreciating that's across the whole spectrum of procurement and all 100+ federal government departments and all that kind of stuff. Our focus here being on defense. But I just want to make sure that while we are talking about innovation and while we're talking about defense as an industry, defense procurement is not just jet planes and Navy ships and military and hardware and all that kind of stuff. Because the announcements that have been made so far, and the public announcements are also including dollars for construction and maintenance and repairs and all these other things that go into it, which could require innovation. Innovation could play a part of that in the new way of delivering things. So we just want to make sure that the vision of what defense is, while a lot of it is about the big stuff, without question, there's a lot of other areas that this occurs. So my team, prior to this role, I was managing a team of buyers. We had a big relationship of delivering procurement for CFB Suffield in Southern Alberta. Pre-pandemic, we had British troops training there, British Army Training Unit Suffield. And so 3,000-ish British troops training there on a regular basis. And they would buy plywood and paint. And they would get actors and makeup artists, all to run all these simulations and things that were going on down there. These are all contracts. They never get talked about, but the reality is they're all contracts. So just to make sure we're keeping that broader mind and open mind of what defense is, certainly defense industry, major players, General Dynamics, et cetera, 100%, and that's where that's where all the industrial technology benefit stuff happens. But there is a lot of broader goods and services that are going to be procured and are procured on an annual basis for Department of National Defense to satisfy all that's required in the defense sector.
So context, there's 4 large defense bases in Alberta, plus one smaller one here in Calgary that's a naval base. 1 Air Force base in Cold Lake, 3 Army bases, Edmonton, Wainwright, and Suffield. These bases are small cities. So exactly what Kris is saying, they need toilet brushes, they need sheets, they need plywood, they need all the materials you need to run a small city. So it's not just about the other kind of, what we think of classically in the defense context, but it's all the infrastructure necessary to maintain a small city and all the people who live in it. So absolutely, yeah, 100% correct. And a lot of the budget that's coming out this fiscal year is focused on the infrastructure deficit that exists on those very bases. So there's going to be a huge amount of capital focused just on keeping those bases operational and bringing them back up to the level that they need to be at.
I'm going to share something with you all. So I became aware that I had so many of my own biases about aerospace and defense as an industry before I knew about it. Where that came from, what experiences that I had, those ideas were in my head that formed a story that started off and became a barrier. Kind of just like, do I belong there? Like, am I needed there? They don't need this. They must be so far ahead, A, B, C, and D. a lot of my last 5.5 months have been validating my beliefs, squashing those beliefs, and being informed with real information. And a lot of that necessarily hasn't been in books, on a website, all those things. It's actually been in conversation who live in this industry. So friends and family members individuals who have been deployed, those that are pilots in the aviation industry, just starting the conversation and saying, hey, this is an industry that I'm interested in. All of a sudden, people around you are like, I know someone. Like, I can connect you. Would you like to be in a conversation with them? And that's led to one person to the next person. And everybody will have a different insight. But that's also what's inspired me to get even more curious, to confirm and verify that if I'm going to invest time, effort, and risk on team and company, before I make any decisions, I want to make sure that I knew for sure, taking assumptions aside, what facts do I have to arm myself in the next decisions that I make. And that's inexpensive, doesn't take a lot of time. You have control and access to all of that right now. I'm absolutely sure of it. And that can be, I believe, the starting point for everyone in this room.
So relationships, time, investment, all these things are factors. I wanted to open it up just quickly. We have a few more minutes left. Are there questions that you would like specifically answered? We'll start there.
Hold on, hold that thought.
Oh, we got a microphone coming. Okay.
The box.
Excellent.
The box. They get to toss the box.
Thank you. My question goes to Kris and possibly Amy, or any of you, by the way. Well, the defense industry is quite a big one, and the SMEs are small. Now, the problem here is that your payment terms might really impact SMEs. Just like working capital, the cash flow, right, comes into play here. So a typical SME makes a supply, and you say 90 days or 60 days, 30 days. Have you assessed the impact, that you create while delayed payment, right? And vis-a-vis, if you put out a supply chain financing platform for these SMEs, and they supplied you on day one, boom, they get payments in day 5. Have you done that articulation around how much of impact will that make into his working capital or cash flow if you paid him earlier, vis-a-vis if you paid him 90 days?
Sure, it's a great question. So we have various payment clauses that we use in our contracts. And again, this is the one-to-one relationship where Government of Canada to the contractor, whoever that is. Subcontracting and everything else, a whole different ballgame. That's between the businesses themselves. But when it comes to us with whoever our contractor is, the standard one that gets put in is net 30. So the process is this. We go out for solicitation, we get the bids in, we award the contract. The goods, we'll use goods because it's a little simpler. Goods get delivered. We do an inspection and acceptance on those. And then once that's done, then we notify that the contractor can send the invoice, and we have 30 days to pay the invoice. Appreciating what you just said. There is, I'll admit, a tricky balance when it comes to federal government contracting and payment because of the risk aversion that and the stewardship of taxpayer dollar. So we are balancing the fact that we are spending taxpayer dollars in order to buy these goods and services. We need to make sure we're getting what we needed and requested and was part of the contract. And then also appreciating the impacts on a small business that cash flow is key. So you will see that our standard is net 30. There is something you don't see out typically in the public domain because it is really an internal process thing, but there is a prompt payment component going on where the objectives have everything paid within 15 days. I would like to see it even shorter and shorter just due to the way the technology works, that it can happen quicker than that once the invoice has arrived and the payment technologies that exist. The reality of having advance payment, which does exist, right? There's milestone payment clauses as well as advance payment clauses that exist, but to use that on a regular basis, is pretty tricky for us because of that stewardship of dollars and the taxpayer dollars. So we're going to get hopefully closer and closer and closer and closer to when the invoice is sent, but it'll still be more on an exception basis that we'll have it as a advanced payment clause, where it would be ahead of when we get the goods or service delivered. Just because it's the reality of the government responsibilities.
And just to add on to that, if that's okay, speaking from experience working with PSPC, they do pay within 30 days. Now, there's a vetting requirement, proof of delivery of, but once that's approved, as long as you do your homework, that's done. But on the other side of that, then there's an even more important responsibility for founders and business owners to be fiscally responsible with cash flow, operating capital, and potentially have other revenue streams in the business as you are pursuing this opportunity. Like, there's a fiscal responsibility there where manage your bank accounts, manage where money is coming, know what is required of you, because if you do your part, then the payments come in. But it's a long plan, and it's a broad plan that is required, is my recommendation.
And we don't have enough time to go into it here. We could have a whole conversation for a day about this kind of stuff. But there is something you're going to hear about in defense called dual use, which is exactly this context of building technologies in one industry that potentially also has a defense application in it. Partially, there's a cash flow value to that because commercial realm tends to move a little faster than defense, depending upon what aspect of commercial realm. But it's also this reflection that there are completely different requirements sometimes in defense. It requires modification of technologies, modifications of personnel, et cetera, that have to go into getting into defense. So that dual use aspect is not one to be misled about. We need to know about that when we're dealing with small innovative companies and being able to make sure cash flow happens. So we'll go to another question now, perhaps.
Up there, where do you?
Sure, wherever, yeah.
Hi everyone, this is probably a little more of a specific question based off our company, but I'm glad you mentioned dual use, Jeff. So we've communicated with defense and veterans here in Canada, and although there was a lot of interest, conversations got stale. And on the other hand, we had even more interest on the American side. So I guess my question is, as a Canadian-based company, where, after the conversation getting stale, where do I lead off to proceed? Or do I just drop it in the lake and head over to the US and just start talking agreements with them?
Again, this could be a much longer conversation. I will say there's a few benefits and challenges to working with the US, and particularly in the US military side of things. They have a tendency to raise the classification level up of the things that they're asking for to push out anybody outside of the US. So that cautionary tale, there might be interest, but they may not be able to work with you. The other thing is that if you start working in the US and you start developing technology specifically for US military use, there's a very good chance you're going to fall into something called ITAR, or the International Trade in Arms Regulations, which is a requirement that basically means that the US government has to approve your sale of that technology to anybody outside of the US. So as a Canadian company, being required to go to the US government to sell your technology becomes problematic at some point, particularly with the relationship that we have right now with the US and where it seems to be trending. So a little caution on that. And one of the things that people will do is they will actually hive off this is for the US and this is for the rest of the world, and make sure you keep that distinction extremely clear so they can't come back to you and say, oh, that stuff you're selling, that's still under ITAR. So you have to be very, very cautious about that. And again, this is not the forum to go into the details of all that, but it's, there's positive aspects, but there's also some significant challenges you really need to consider going down that pathway.
I was just going to add one quick thing.
Yeah.
For your question, and again, I'm 6 months into this, but what I'm already understanding is action speaks volumes from the contractor side, so from the prime side, and even as Jeff has mentioned, he started conversations 10 years ago. They remembered. If they're paying attention, what I'm already feeling, because I felt the same way in my early conversations. And then I show up to my third show, and they were so good that you could be here. By the way, I'm going to be here. Great. Can you meet with this person? They'll actually be here. I believe because actions are proving higher volumes than what's being said or not that we're hearing. If you're seeing action and response back at any point, stick with it. They have other priorities and mandates that they need to focus on as well too. It's not that it's not important, but there's also a time and place, but there's value. So if they're speaking to you of the thousands that are reaching out when that list is public to everybody in Canada, and I'm sure everyone's emailing that email address, lean into that and have some faith too. Because this is people and people, right?
Yeah, I'm going to add very briefly because it's a really great point. And again, I'm going to give kudos to Jeff because I'm not always the best to respond immediately. We do have like a tremendous list of priorities, and I think sometimes Jeff reaches out, and honestly, it may take a week to respond, but he understands, right? So we've already established a relationship where we like the technology that Jeff's company produces. Okay, but sometimes the higher level engagements we have are significantly more priority. It doesn't mean that we don't want to engage Jeff, but the timeliness of things certainly has a big impact on how people respond. So it is really important to be persistent. Obviously not annoying, but you know, persistent to say, hey, how are things going? I understand you're busy. You know, can we talk? And if we have to delay that, I understand. But that type of communication and maintaining a good relationship is extremely important. And that comes back to your own conviction of what you do and the relationship you build with either it's PSBC or Primes or other SMEs.
So I'm being told we're run out of time here, unfortunately. But what I would say about this is obviously this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding what's going on in the defense industry. If you want to proceed forward this, you need to start talking to people who are already in that industry because they're the ones who've got the battle scars. They know how to proceed forward in this. And more, particularly as we're getting this increased volume of spending in this industry, you need to connect to people who know what that means and work with them because otherwise you're going to run into a lot of barriers. So persistence, do your homework. Don't approach a defense prime until you've actually done your homework to see why they would even care about you reaching out to them. And you know, expect to make an investment if you're going to pursue this industry. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.